That afternoon, my world tilted. My daughter, just 18, barely stepping into adulthood, was hanging from the oak tree in our front yard. Her wrists were tied with rough rope, a bright violation notice pinned to her shirt like some twisted badge of shame, and who stood beneath her basking in the chaos? HOA Karen. Clipboard clutched like a royal scepter, sunglasses, reflecting the horror on my neighbors' faces. With a smug grin, she declared this was community justice for breaking her sacred HOA rules. People crowded the sidewalks, some filming, some whispering, some frozen in disbelief. I felt every muscle in my body coil, ready to rip that rope apart with my bare hands. But then the ground itself seemed to tremble. A low, steady thump echoed across the neighborhood. Rotor blades, getting closer. 2 minutes later, Black Hawk helicopters descended on Maple Crest. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Maple Crest was the kind of neighborhood you'd see on a glossy postcard, the sort of place real estate agents love to brag about. Trimmed hedges, manicured lawns, pastel-painted houses lined up like obedient soldiers. Every driveway was pressure washed to a shine. Every mailbox painted the same approved shade of beige. On paper, it was a suburban paradise. But anyone who actually lived there knew the truth. Maple Crest wasn't run by friendly neighbors or community spirit. No, Maple Crest was an empire, and its iron-fisted ruler was one woman, Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. Karen didn't just enforce rules. She invented them. She wrote them in red ink, waved them like scripture, and wielded her clipboard as if it were the Constitution itself. She had the uncanny ability to make even the most law-abiding resident feel like a criminal. Forget parking on the street overnight, she'd fine you for thinking about it. Forget a lawn gnome or holiday lights left up a day too long, she'd slap you with a violation faster than you could say Merry Christmas. And heaven forbid you challenged her authority. Karen thrived on fear. She had built an entire kingdom out of intimidation, gossip, and fines that multiplied like weeds. When my wife and I first moved in, I thought maybe she was just passionate. You know, the type who cares a little too much about property values. But as the years went on, it became clear Karen wasn't passionate, she was addicted. Addicted to control, addicted to power, addicted to the thrill of watching grown adults squirm because their trash cans were visible from the street. Now I could handle her nonsense. I'd lived long enough to know that life was full of people like her bullies, dressed up in pastel cardigans. And to me, ignoring her was easier than giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. But my daughter, she was 18, fiery, and allergic to hypocrisy. She wasn't built for silence. She wasn't built to bow her head when injustice strutted past our front door. The first skirmish began with something laughably small, our mailbox. One summer afternoon, Karen showed up, clipboard under her arm, sunglasses glinting like a villain from an old western. She tapped the side of our mailbox with a manicured nail and announced it was non-compliant. Non-compliant, I asked, staring at the same beige box every other house had. Too glossy, she sniffed. The bylaws require a matte finish. Glossy reflects sunlight and could distract drivers. I nearly choked. Distract drivers. From what, falling asleep in suburbia, I almost let it slide. Almost. But before I could answer, my daughter stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. "You've got to be kidding," she said loud enough for half the cul-de-sac to hear. "You mean to tell me you're worried a mailbox is going to blind someone? What is this, the Las Vegas Strip?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like being mocked, especially not by an 18-year-old who refused to tremble under her gaze. From that day on, Karen had a target. Not on me, not on my wife, on my daughter. It didn't take long for the petty wars to escalate. One morning, we found a violation slip taped to our front door. The crime, my daughter's bicycle propped neatly against the side of the garage. Apparently, unapproved outdoor storage was a violation. The next week, another slip arrived. This time, it was her chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Bright flowers, doodles, nothing obscene, just art. But Karen claimed it was graffiti and lowered the fine hammer again. My daughter didn't back down. She doubled down. The more Karen tried to shame her, the bolder she became. She left little chalk caricatures of Karen on the sidewalk, complete with oversized sunglasses and a giant evil clipboard. Neighbors laughed when they walked by. Some even gave her a thumbs up, and that was the problem. Karen didn't just want obedience, she wanted reverence. She wanted to be feared, respected, untouchable. So when my daughter's art turned her into the neighborhood's inside joke, Karen's smirk cracked into something uglier. At first, she tried to outmaneuver her. She sent official notices, warning that any future graffiti would result in community service hours. Yes, she actually wrote that down as if she were running a small dictatorship. My daughter read the notice out loud, tore it in half, and laughed. I should have known right then that Karen wouldn't stop. That a woman like her who lived and breathed for control wouldn't tolerate open defiance, especially from someone half her age who dared to make her look ridiculous. The neighbors noticed too. I could see it in their eyes when they walked their dogs past our house. Half of them were secretly delighted to watch my daughter poke holes in Karen's inflated ego. The other half looked terrified, as though even being seen near our property might invite Karen's wrath. And me, I tried to play referee. I told my daughter to cool it, to let it go, to stop giving Karen ammunition. But she'd just grin and say, "Dad, you can't fight bullies by staying quiet. You fight them by making sure they know you're not afraid." She wasn't wrong, but she didn't know the depth of Karen's pettiness, the lengths to which she'd go to win. Looking back, it wasn't about mailboxes or bicycles or chalk drawings. It was about Karen's throne, her image, her absolute need to prove that Maple Crest was her kingdom, and anyone who mocked her crown had to pay. And in her twisted logic, my daughter had committed the ultimate act of treason. I didn't realize it then, but the battle lines were drawn, and Karen wasn't planning on a war of fines anymore. She was planning something much darker. Because to her, it wasn't just about a teenager breaking rules. It was about a challenge to her authority. And for HOA Karen, there was no greater crime. If you've never seen a Suburban HOA president in full meltdown mode, let me paint you a picture. It's like a high school drama queen mixed with a traffic cop wrapped inside a wannabe dictator. And that was Karen, the day she went after my daughter in public. It started over something so innocent it was laughable: chalk drawings. My daughter had taken her box of colored chalk outside one Saturday morning and covered the entire stretch of sidewalk in front of our house with wildflowers' hearts and one impressively detailed sketch of our dog. Neighbors walking by smiled, snapped pictures, even complimented her for brightening up the street. But then came Karen, clipboard under one arm, latte in the other, sunglasses perched like a crown on her head. She stopped in front of the drawings as though she had stumbled onto a crime scene. What she sneered, "Is this defacement doing on community property?" My daughter, sitting cross-legged on the concrete, didn't even flinch. "It's chalk. It'll wash off with the rain. Or, a garden hose." Karen jabbed her clipboard in the air like a sword. "Graffiti is a violation of HOA bylaws section 12 paragraph 6. This is vandalism, young lady. Pure vandalism." Neighbors gathered. You could feel the electricity in the air. A confrontation was coming, and in Maple Crest, watching Karen throw down was like a spectator sport. My daughter rose to her feet, brushed chalk dust off her jeans, and looked Karen dead in the eye. "Vandalism? Lady, it's a drawing of a sunflower. If you think that's a crime, you need to touch some grass, literally." The crowd stifled laughter. I swear I saw old Mr. Thompson from 2 doors down nearly choke on his lemonade. Karen's face went crimson. Not from the sun, but from the fact that an 18-year-old had just embarrassed her in front of her subjects. "You will apologize," she hissed. "Right now, publicly. Or I'll have no choice but to escalate this to the board." Now, my daughter could have played nice. She could have mumbled some fake apology and walked away. But that wasn't her style. Instead, she leaned forward, cupped her hands around her mouth like a megaphone, and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just learned that flowers drawn in chalk are a federal offense, according to our neighborhood queen." The sidewalk erupted in laughter. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. Someone muttered. About time someone told Karen off. And in that moment, Karen lost something she couldn't bear to lose control. She stormed away, heels clicking furiously against the pavement, but not before spitting out one final promise over her shoulder. "You'll regret this. Mark my words. That should have been the end of it." A petty squabble over chalk drawings destined to be forgotten after the next rainstorm. But with Karen, nothing ended quietly. The very next day, we woke up to find a bright orange notice taped to our front door. "Mandatory compliance hearing," it read in bold letters. "Our offense: unauthorized use of community property and disrespect of HOA authority." Disrespect of HOA authority. Can you believe that apparently Maple Crest wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a monarchy, and Karen had declared herself judge, jury, and executioner? I wanted to ignore it. Toss the notice in the trash, maybe even frame it as a joke. But my daughter, she took it as fuel. "You see," she said, waving the paper in the air, "she's scared. That's why she's lashing out. We can't let her win." I should have known then that things were only going to escalate, because when two immovable objects collide, an HOA president drunk on power and an 18-year-old who refuses to bow, you don't get compromise, you get an explosion. And sure enough, the following week brought another confrontation. This time in front of the entire community. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind where neighbors usually sat on porches sipping iced tea. My daughter was outside sketching again this time with a group of kids from down the street who thought her chalk art was cooler than video games. She was halfway through drawing a giant dragon across the sidewalk when Karen descended like a thundercloud. She didn't come alone. Two of her so-called HOA security volunteers flanked her middle-aged men with matching polo shirts and clipboards. They looked like bouncers at a middle school dance. Karen's voice cut through the chatter like a chainsaw. This has gone far enough. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist all unauthorized activity on community property. My daughter stood chalk still in hand, dragon half finished under her feet. She tilted her head and smirked. Or what? You'll find me. You'll write me up. Newsflash, Karen. I don't even pay HOA dues. My parents do. That line hit harder than any insult could have. The crowd burst into laughter again. The kids giggled. And Karen, she shook with rage, her whole body trembling as though the very foundation of her power had cracked. You insolent child, she shrieked. You think this is funny. You think mocking me will end well for you. You need to learn respect. The neighbors fell silent. It wasn't about chalk anymore. It wasn't about fines. Karen had crossed into dangerous territory. And in her eyes, I saw something shift. This wasn't just an HOA president throwing a tantrum. This was a woman plotting revenge. I tried to step in to de-escalate. I put a hand on my daughter's shoulder and told her to come inside. But Karen wasn't finished. She jabbed her finger at us, her voice trembling with fury. You'll pay for this humiliation. Both of you. Don't think for 1 second I won't make an example out of your family. The crowd gasped. My stomach tightened. Neighbors glanced at each other nervously, unsure if they'd just witnessed a threat or a promise. And my daughter, she didn't back down. She looked Karen dead in the eye and said, "Go ahead, try me. I swear." Time stopped. The neighborhood felt like a stage. Every house, a silent audience. Karen's face twisted into something I can only describe as pure venom. And right then I knew this wasn't going to end with fines or notices. This was personal now. Karen wanted to break my daughter, and she'd stop at nothing to do it. There are moments in life you replay over and over trying to convince yourself they couldn't have really happened. For me, that moment was the afternoon I came home and saw my 18-year-old daughter tied to a tree in our front yard. I had just pulled into the driveway after a long shift, the sun low in the sky, painting the cul-de-sac gold. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A crowd had gathered, neighbors whispering some filming with their phones. And then I saw her, my daughter, bound by thick rope around her wrists, arms raised above her head, tethered to the oak tree we'd planted when she was 5. Her sneakers dangled just above the grass, her face flushed but defiant. And standing beneath her, basking in the spotlight of her cruelty, was Karen. Clipboard tucked neatly under her arm, sunglasses, gleaming, that smug smile plastered across her face like she'd just won a war. "What the hell is this?" I roared, slamming my car door so hard it echoed down the street. Karen turned to me calm as ever, as though she were presiding over some HOA court. "This," she announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "is community discipline. Your daughter has repeatedly vandalized HOA property, mocked authority, and disrupted neighborhood harmony. Per bylaw, Section 15, Subsection 2, I am enforcing a public corrective measure." My jaw dropped. "You tied my daughter to a damn tree," Karen shrugged. "Symbolism matters. Disobedience must be rooted out." The crowd gasped at the wordplay, some laughing nervously, others horrified. A few neighbors stepped back, clutching their kids. One woman whispered, "This is insane," but didn't dare say it louder. I rushed forward, but 2 of Karen's so-called HOA security volunteers blocked my path. Middle-aged men with matching polo shirts and clipboards, same ones from before, stood like sentries, arms crossed as though this was some official proceeding. "Touch her," Karen snapped, "and you'll be charged with interfering in a disciplinary action. That's grounds for fines and possibly expulsion from the HOA. Expulsion. Like this was a medieval village, and we'd be banished from the castle walls." My daughter, hanging there like some modern-day Joan of Arc, locked eyes with me. She wasn't crying, she wasn't begging. She was glaring down at Karen with a fire so sharp I swear it could have cut through the rope itself. "Dad, don't," she said firmly. "She wants you to lose it. Don't give her the satisfaction." Karen smirked. "Listen to your child. She knows her place now." Neighbors murmured. Some lifted their phones higher, filming every second. In Maple Crest, gossip was currency, and this spectacle was gold. But behind the lenses I could see real fear. Fear of Karen, fear of what crossing her might cost them. I clenched my fists so hard, my nails dug into my palms. My voice trembled not with fear, but with fury. "You're out of your mind. Untie her right now, or Or what Karen cut in, tilting her head like a vulture about to feast. You'll call the police. Go ahead. I've already spoken to Officer Daniels. He understands this is an internal HOA matter. And if you lay a finger on me, well, she gestured to the cameras. The whole neighborhood will see you assaulting your HOA president. How do you think that'll play out? The arrogance was staggering. She'd turned an act of cruelty into political theater. My daughter lifted her chin and spat back. You're pathetic. You think this makes you powerful. You're just a bitter old woman hiding behind a clipboard. The crowd erupted in whispers. Some neighbors gasped, others chuckled nervously. Karen's face twisted her mask, slipping for just a second. Then she recovered, smiling like a snake. You'll learn, she said coldly. By the end of today, you'll both learn. I stepped forward again, ready to rip those ropes apart with my bare hands. My blood pounded in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to end this madness. But then something caught my attention. A sound. Faint at first, then growing louder. A low, rhythmic thump. Whump. 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 I froze. My daughter heard it too. Her eyes widened just slightly. Karen, too full of herself, didn't notice. The crowd murmured some, looking to the sky. It was the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors. Karen crossed her arms, mistaking the shift in atmosphere as proof of her dominance. See, she said smugly, she hangs there until I decide she's learned her lesson. But she had no idea what was about to descend on Maple Crest. The noise grew louder, closer, until the branches of the oak tree rattled. Dust whipped across the street. People shielded their faces from the gust. Children screamed. Karen finally looked up, her smirk faltering. What on earth? 3 dark shapes broke across the horizon, slicing through the sky with terrifying precision. Black Hawk helicopters roaring closer with each second. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some screamed, some cheered, some dove for cover. Karen stumbled backward, her sunglasses nearly flying off. And in that whirlwind of panic and power, my daughter, still tied, still defiant, smiled. Because she knew. Karen had made her move. And now, forces far greater than Maple Crest's HOA were about to make theirs. The helicopters weren't a coincidence. They weren't lost, they weren't passing through. They were coming for her, my daughter. Most of the neighbors didn't know who she really was. To them, she was just the rebellious 18-year-old who dared to mouth off to Karen. But beneath the sarcasm and stubborn streak was a truth I hadn't shared with anyone in Maple Crest. And now, with rotors shaking the sky, it was about to come out, whether I liked it or not. See, my daughter wasn't just my little girl. She wasn't just a high school grad killing time with chalk art. She was a cadet, an enrolled trainee in one of the most competitive military academies in the country. Months ago, she'd been selected for a classified federal program. She had undergone survival drills, tactical training, and even carried an emergency beacon linked to her unit. That beacon had been quiet until Karen decided to play executioner by tying her to a tree. The moment the rope cut into her wrists, the device hidden under her jacket strap transmitted a signal. And now 3 Black Hawk helicopters thundered over Maple Crest, like angels of wrath. The neighborhood lost its mind. Phones dropped. Lawns, chairs toppled. People shrieked and ran for cover, clutching their kids as the first helicopter swooped low, whipping up dust and leaves. One man's barbecue grill tipped over, sending hot dogs rolling down the sidewalk. Another neighbor's decorative gnome took flight, smashing against the pavement. And in the middle of it all, Karen stood frozen, her jaw slack, clutching her clipboard like a security blanket. She tried to shout something, but the roar of the rotors drowned her out. The helicopters circled once, then one descended lower, its landing skids kicking up a hurricane of dust. A side door slid open, and out came soldiers in full tactical gear, ropes unfurling as they rappelled into the cul-de-sac. It was chaos, and yet within the chaos there was purpose. The first soldier hit the ground, running straight toward my daughter. With one swift motion, he sliced through the ropes and lowered her gently to the grass. 2 others formed a protective perimeter, weapons drawn not at anyone specifically, but at the crowd as a warning, stay back. The entire scene looked like something ripped from an action movie. And the star of the show wasn't Karen. It was my daughter. She rolled her wrists, wincing, but when her eyes met mine, she grinned. Told you she couldn't win, Dad. Karen stumbled forward, coughing against the dust, her voice rising above the noise. This is outrageous. This is private property. This is a community matter. A soldier turned toward her visor, gleaming, and barked into his radio. Seconds later, another Black Hawk began its descent, the sound so deafening Karen's complaints dissolved into meaningless screeches. I almost laughed. The self-proclaimed queen of Maple Crest was being drowned out by something she couldn't control, real authority. The neighbors were stunned. Some filmed, others ducked behind cars. But one by one, I saw their expressions change. Fear melted into awe, awe into realization. The queen had no power here, and in that moment I decided to let them in on the truth. I stepped forward, voice carrying above the rotor wash. You all think my daughter is just some kid with chalk and a smart mouth. But she's more than that. She's a cadet in training for the United States military. And when Karen tied her to that tree, she didn't just humiliate a teenager. She triggered a federal emergency response. The crowd gasped. Karen's face drained of color. Federal response, she croaked. Don't be ridiculous. This is HOA jurisdiction. Before she could finish, one of the soldiers stepped forward, handing me a folder sealed with an official insignia. Sir, he said firmly, per federal mandate, your daughter is under our protection. Her safety is a matter of national security. I opened the folder, flashing the pages just enough for the nearest neighbors to see. Stamp, signed, sealed. It was real. No amount of Karen's blustering could undo it. Karen staggered back, clinging to her clipboard. No, this is a stunt. This is fake. You can't just... But her voice faltered as the soldiers formed up around my daughter, escorting her like royalty through the stunned crowd. The same neighbors who once cowered under Karen's rule now parted like the Red Sea, their eyes wide, their phones recording every second. The power had shifted. For years, Karen thrived on intimidation. But now, with helicopters thundering overhead and soldiers standing guard, she was the one trembling. Her kingdom of pastel-painted tyranny crumbled before everyone's eyes. My daughter, brushing dust from her jacket, looked at Karen and said with deadly calm, "Next time you think about tying someone up, make sure they're not trained to call in backup." The neighbors chuckled nervously. Karen's lips quivered, but no words came out. I could feel it, the tide turning. The crowd wasn't afraid of her anymore. They were laughing at her. And in Karen's twisted little world, that was the ultimate punishment. She tried one last time, her voice cracking. This is a violation of community bylaws. I will file a complaint. I will fine you all." But her words were swallowed by the roar of a second helicopter landing in the cul-de-sac. Soldiers poured out their boots, slamming against the pavement with authority no clipboard could match. And in that instant, the truth became undeniable. Karen wasn't in charge anymore. The neighborhood had a new reality. And for the first time, Maple Crest's queen realized she was just another pawn. If you've ever heard a Black Hawk helicopter land in a suburban cul-de-sac, you'll understand why people describe it as apocalyptic. The ground shakes, leaves whip through the air, and every carefully trimmed hedge suddenly looks like it's been through a hurricane. Maple Crest, our neat pastel cookie-cutter neighborhood, was instantly transformed into a war zone. The first Black Hawk touched down right in front of Mrs. Delgado's hydrangeas, flattening her flower beds into mulch. The second hovered low, its downdraft ripping one neighbor's American flag right off the pole. The third stayed circling above, casting a shadow so massive it swallowed half the street. And then the soldiers came. They weren't HOA security volunteers in polo shirts. These were real professionals, helmets, body armor, tactical gear gleaming in the sunlight. They hit the ground with precision, forming tight formations as if Maple Crest were enemy territory. Karen, of course, lost her mind. "This is trespassing," she shrieked, clutching her clipboard so hard I thought it might snap in two. "This is a private community. You can't land helicopters here without HOA approval." The soldiers ignored her. One barked orders into his radio, another secured the perimeter, and two more guided my daughter away from the oak tree like she was the president's daughter. The neighbors didn't know what to do. Some hid behind their SUVs, peeking out with phones shaking in their hands. Others openly cheered, clapping as though this was the best entertainment they'd seen since the 4th of July parade. Kids screamed with delight, running to get closer, until their parents yanked them back. Meanwhile, Karen tried to reassert control, the only way she knew how, shouting bylaws into the wind. Section 9, paragraph 3 of the Community Covenant clearly states she began her voice shrill. But then a helicopter's rotor wash blasted her so hard her sunglasses flew off and skidded across the pavement. The crowd laughed. And that's when it hit me, the balance of power had shifted. For years, Karen had ruled through intimidation. But now, stripped of her props and drowned out by military hardware, she looked small, pathetic even. The lead soldier visor, reflecting the chaos, stepped forward and addressed me directly. "Sir, your daughter is secure." We received her distress beacon and responded accordingly. Karen tried to wedge herself between us, waving her clipboard like it was a badge. "I am the HOA president, and I demand an explanation. This entire charade is in violation of ma'am." The soldier cut her off, his tone so sharp it sliced the air. "Step back." Karen blinked, stunned. No one had ever told her to step back before. She puffed herself up, ready to argue. Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, the soldier replied flatly. You're the civilian who unlawfully restrained a federal cadet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors whispered eyes, darting between Karen and the soldiers. Karen's jaw dropped. She sputtered, "Cadet. She's just a kid. She drew on sidewalks. The soldier didn't even look at her. Your actions triggered a federal emergency. You will remain here until further notice." Karen's face twisted a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You can't do this. I'm in charge here. This is my community." But no one was listening anymore. The soldiers fanned out, securing the area. One set up a temporary command post on a neighbor's lawn. Another directed traffic, waving confused residents back into their homes. The Black Hawks roared above, like watchful hawks, making it clear Maple Crest was no longer under Karen's rule. I'll admit, part of me felt vindicated. Watching Karen shriek into the wind while her kingdom collapsed around her was more satisfying than I could have imagined. But another part of me was in awe, because this wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice finally catching up with her. My daughter, rubbing her sore wrists, stood tall beside the soldiers. She wasn't broken. She wasn't humiliated. She looked stronger than ever, her chin lifted, her eyes burning with pride. Karen, desperate for attention, turned to the crowd. "Neighbors, you've seen this. This is government overreach. They're staging this to humiliate me." But instead of nodding in fear, the neighbors shook their heads. Some even laughed. One man shouted, "About time someone shut you up, Karen." Her power was gone, just like that. Years of ruling through fines and fear evaporated in the dust of helicopter rotors. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. The soldiers finished their sweep and regrouped. One of them handed me a sealed envelope. "Sir, official notice your family will be under temporary federal protection until the investigation concludes." I took it, glancing at the bold insignia. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the sheer absurdity of it all. My little corner of suburbia had just turned into the set of a Tom Clancy novel. Karen lunged forward, trying one last time. "You have no jurisdiction here. I'll sue, I'll fine every one of you." The soldier nearest to her raised a hand. "Ma'am, you're being placed under observation. Do not interfere further." And for the first time in her life, Karen shut up. The crowd cheered, not loudly, but with a ripple of relieved chuckles and murmurs. People began to realize what we all should have known long ago. Karen was just a person. A loud, petty, clipboard-wielding tyrant who mistook fear for respect. And when real power landed, when soldiers descended from the sky, she had nothing. As the helicopters roared overhead and the dust settled on Maple Crest, I knew one thing for certain: the Queen had been dethroned. And her fall wasn't over yet. There's a funny thing about power: it looks enormous when you're standing under it, but once it's stripped away, you realize how flimsy it always was. That was Karen in those moments after the soldiers arrived, no longer Queen of Maple Crest, just a woman clutching a clipboard while her neighbors whispered and laughed. The soldiers didn't waste time. Two of them moved to either side of Karen, not aggressively, but firmly enough that everyone watching knew she was no longer free to strut around barking orders. One of them spoke into his headset, subject contained. "Awaiting transport." Subject. Not president, not ma'am, not even Karen, just subject. Karen flailed, pointing her clipboard at my daughter like it was some kind of legal weapon. You did this. You and your father conspired to humiliate me." My daughter folded her arms, unimpressed. "You tied me to a tree. You humiliated yourself." The neighbors erupted in murmurs. A few laughed outright. Mr. Thompson, who'd nearly choked on lemonade during the chalk incident, muttered, "Best HOA meeting I've ever seen." Karen's face twisted. She turned to the crowd for backup, scanning for a single loyal subject. But instead of nodding heads and fearful silence, she saw phones raise smirks hiding behind hands and the unmistakable sound of chuckles rolling through the cul-de-sac. Her allies, the so-called board members who had once stood by her, suddenly found urgent reasons to melt into the background. Mrs. Riley, the treasurer, fiddled with her phone and avoided eye contact. The vice president, a guy named Paul, who had built his identity on enforcing grass-length regulations, stammered something about needing to check on dinner and slipped into his house. Karen's empire crumbled one cowardly retreat at a time. I stepped forward, finally letting the weight of years of fines and harassment roll off my shoulders. "You know what, Karen? I used to think you were just petty, just annoying. But today you crossed a line. And look around. Nobody's afraid of you anymore." She sneered at me, though it looked more like a grimace. "You think this changes anything. You think these people will stand by you. They'll crawl back the moment I'm reinstated." But she said it too loudly, and the crowd answered back. "No, we won't," someone called out. Another voice. "We're done with you, Karen." Then another, louder. "You don't run this place anymore." It spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had spent years ducking their heads now spoke freely, their words tumbling out as though a dam had broken. Complaints, laughter, pent-up grievances about petty fines and harassment all came pouring into the open. Karen spun in circles, desperate to shush them. Quiet, quiet, all of you. You can't talk to me this way. I am your president. But the soldiers were already guiding her away from the tree. And the louder she shrieked, the more ridiculous she looked. My daughter, standing tall, despite the rope burns on her wrists, leaned toward me and whispered, "She's finished." And she was right. One of the soldiers handed me a paper, an official notice authorizing federal investigation into the incident. It stated clearly unlawful restraint, assault, interference with federal property. Charges. Real ones. Not HOA citations that could be paid off with a check, but criminal charges that would follow Karen far beyond Maple Crest. When the soldier read the accusations aloud for the crowd, Karen's legs nearly buckled. "This is outrageous," she shrieked. "I am the law here." The soldier's reply was calm, professional, and utterly devastating. "No, ma'am. You're under arrest." The neighbors gasped, then clapped. Actually clapped. It started with one person, then another, and soon half the cul-de-sac was applauding as Karen was restrained. She thrashed, her voice breaking. "You'll regret this, all of you. This neighborhood will rot without me." "Good," someone shouted back. "Let it rot." Another voice chimed in. "Better than rotting under you." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Loud, raw, cathartic laughter. And it wasn't just me. Laughter rippled through the entire street, drowning out Karen's final desperate cries as the soldiers escorted her toward the waiting vehicle. The Queen of Maple Crest was no longer feared. She was a punchline. And her downfall wasn't just in being dragged away, it was in the realization that she had never truly ruled. The moment the neighbors stopped fearing her, she was nothing. Just a bitter woman with a clipboard and a craving for power she never really had. As the Blackhawks prepared to lift off, I looked around at my neighbors. For the first time in years, people weren't avoiding each other's eyes. They were smiling, talking, sharing relief like it was oxygen. It felt lighter, as though the very air in Maple Crest had been cleansed. My daughter nudged me, smirking. "Guess she won't be handing out violation slips anymore." I chuckled. "Guess not." Karen screamed one last time as she was shoved into the transport. This isn't over, but we all knew it was. For Karen, it was the end. For Maple Crest, it was the beginning of something new. And for me, it was vindication. Sweet overdue vindication. When the last helicopter lifted off, Maple Crest looked nothing like the glossy neighborhood brochure I'd seen when we first moved in. Lawns were torn up by skids, flower beds flattened, and dust coated every car in sight. But no one cared. Not one neighbor complained about their roses or hedges. Because Karen was gone. For years, her presence had been the shadow across every sunny afternoon. She'd been the reason neighbors whispered instead of laughed. The reason people tiptoed around their own homes. The reason grown adults felt like children asking permission just to hang a wreath. And now, in one surreal afternoon, that shadow had been ripped away. The very next day, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, or tried to. Half the members resigned outright, citing stress and irreconcilable differences. The other half scrambled to distance themselves from Karen, insisting they had no idea she was capable of tying an 18-year-old girl to a tree. Of course, everyone knew they'd looked the other way for years. They'd enforced her petty fines, rubber-stamped her ridiculous bylaws, and nodded along while she berated anyone who dared to question her. Their sudden innocence act fooled nobody. By the end of the week, the board dissolved under federal oversight. A vote was scheduled for a new community council. For the first time since I'd lived there, neighbors showed up eager to participate. People who'd avoided Karen like she was contagious suddenly felt free to speak up, propose changes, and dream about a neighborhood run by actual community spirit instead of fear. And in the middle of all that change was my daughter. She became a legend overnight. The video of her tied to the oak tree, defiant even with rope cutting into her wrists, spread like wildfire on social media. Clips of the helicopters landing racked up millions of views. Strangers commented things like, "This girl is tougher than my entire HOA combined," and Karen just speed ran her way into federal prison. My daughter, of course, rolled her eyes at the attention. "I didn't ask to go viral," she grumbled, though the smirk on her face said she didn't mind too much. She wasn't broken by what happened. If anything, she came out stronger. She walked taller, spoke louder, and carried herself with the calm of someone who had stared down a bully and won. And whenever people asked her what she'd learned, she'd answer simply, "Never give power to someone who only knows how to use it against you." Karen, meanwhile, faced a very different fate. The charges were real unlawful restraint, assault, endangerment, and more. Her lawyers tried to argue it was symbolic discipline, but even the judge laughed at that one. She was indicted, her name plastered across headlines, her reputation shredded beyond repair. The HOA crown she clung to so desperately was reduced to a punchline. And for the first time in years, Maple Crest began to feel like a neighborhood again. Kids played outside without worrying about chalk fines. Families put up lawn decorations without measuring them against some imaginary rule book. People even left their trash cans out a little longer than usual just because they could. It wasn't perfect, no neighborhood ever island, but it was free. As for me, I finally felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. I could sit on my porch in the evening, sipping coffee, watching the sunset, without waiting for Karen's shadow to darken my doorstep. I could laugh with neighbors, share stories, even joke about the chaos we'd lived through. And every time I looked at that oak tree in our yard, I didn't see humiliation anymore. I saw resilience. I saw the day my daughter proved that bullies, no matter how loud, always fall when you stand tall. Because in the end, Karen didn't lose to helicopters or soldiers. She lost because she mistook silence for submission. She thought the absence of resistance meant victory. But when the moment came, she discovered what every tyrant eventually learns: respect can't be forced. Fear doesn't last. And once it's gone, so are you. Looking back, I realized the story of Karen isn't just about an HOA president gone mad. It's about the dangers of unchecked power in any form. Give someone a clipboard, a title, and the ability to find their neighbors, and you'll see their true character come out. Some use authority to serve. Others, like Karen, use it to dominate. But bullies, whether in schoolyards, offices, or suburban neighborhoods, have one fatal flaw. They believe fear equals loyalty. They think silence means respect, and they never notice the moment when people stop being afraid. That's the lesson my daughter taught me. Hanging from that oak tree, yet unbroken courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's standing tall, refusing to bend, and daring to laugh in the face of tyranny. So if you're watching this, ask yourself, who's the Karen in your life? And more importantly, when are you going to stop letting them control the story? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit subscribe, because in this neighborhood, the drama never really ends.